What do you build? Do you enjoy?
Welcome to the Kent Lapp Podcast.
Do not try this at home.
Peter, welcome to the podcast.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, pleasure to have you. Congratulations on the Christianity Today article. That's sort of a big deal.
Yeah, it was
That's
very
kind
exciting.
of a big website.
Very exciting.
I've never published a blog on that website. Probably never will, but congratulations.
Well, I'm really thankful for the people who passed me on to them and
Yeah.
the editor there that I worked with.
Yeah, that's really great. So we want to talk about that. I wanted to ask you first, though, how is the vaccine? You got that this week, right?
It's
or
good.
recently?
Yes.
The
so
COVID-19 vaccine.
a week ago,
Just to be
I got
clear.
the second dose of the Pfizer vaccine.
Okay.
So as of today, I am 95% protected or whatever. So it was great. I'm a licensed professional counselor.
Yep.
So we qualified in the second round of healthcare providers to get the vaccine. And,
Okay.
yeah, mostly side effect free. Other than the second dose, I had a little bit of side effects for 24 hours, but
Okay.
it was not bad at all.
When did you get the first dose?
It was the day after my birthday. It was
Okay.
January 8th.
Oh, okay.
I just remember because my birthday was on the 7th.
Yeah. Your birthday was right after all that mess then, because that was the 6th that went down in Capitol, right?
Yeah.
So
Very
your birth-
eventful week.
It was, yeah.
For me.
Yeah, for sure it
I
was.
turned 30. I got the vaccine.
Oh, really?
and
Oh,
the world was on
congratulations.
fire.
Yeah. No, I had forgotten about that, but I remember now seeing that on Instagram. 30 is a big deal, too.
Yeah.
So you got the first dose January the 8th, and you got the second dose last week?
Mm-hmm.
So they're, 3 weeks apart, 2 weeks apart?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And did you feel anything from the first dose?
Mm-mm.
Nothing at all?
Couldn't
Okay.
tell.
Almost just like you were just giving blood or something, just like
Yeah.
a shot, and it's
No.
but no side effects. And the second one, you felt some stuff. I don't know much
Yeah.
about the vaccine. That's why I'm just curious.
Yeah, so I think from what I heard beforehand and afterward, what I experienced was pretty common, which was like 10 to 12 hours after the second dose, I started feeling a little loopy. My roommates and I were
Oh,
watching
really?
Pirates of the Caribbean. It was
Yep.
one of our roommates' birthday, and his request was to watch like the original Pirates of the Caribbean. And I noticed myself finding it a little too entertaining.
Oh, really?
You know? And I hadn't had any adult beverages or anything, so I was like not sure what was going on.
Blame it on the
And-
vaccine.
No, it was. I think it was the vaccine. I was just way too entertained.
Oh,
by this
really?
movie. And then the muscle aches and the headache and the
Okay.
chills started. And then I had a really strange dream. Like I dream often enough, but this was probably one of the scariest dreams I've ever had. And I've heard people say when they like have COVID that they had like very vivid dreams.
Really? I haven't
So
heard that.
I don't know if this was like
Yeah.
COVID dream light or
Yep.
something, but yeah,
That was like
Not
the night
fun.
after the second dose, or just thereabouts, like soon after?
night after.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I got it in the morning and then that night.
And then how long did those side effects hang around? Like a couple of days you felt that way, or primarily just that day? Or
24 hours. I'd say by
Okay.
lunch the next day, I
Okay,
couldn't
gotcha.
really feel anything different.
And so what's funny, well, I mean, not funny, but what's interesting about that is like that's how some people experience COVID-19, right? The difference is, though, by taking the vaccine, like in theory, you don't spread the virus anymore. Is that right? Do you know?
Yeah, so I did, because I have roommates who don't have the vaccine yet. We were curious, okay, what does this mean for me and my level of caution and their level of caution? And we did some deep research, and they don't have the final like results yet of the studies they've done of people who have had vaccines as
Oh,
to
really?
whether they could still like be carriers of coronavirus and pass it on to other people. But the closest, I guess, analog are research about people who are test positive for COVID, but are truly asymptomatic, whether they can spread COVID. And a number of the most like rigorous studies show that if someone is positive for COVID, but has zero symptoms, it's much less likely that they can pass COVID on to someone else.
Oh,
infect
really?
someone.
So it's almost like how the virus affects you is going to have some indication on how you might spread it, or how quickly or readily you might spread it to others. Like if you get the virus and you're basically asymptomatic, you don't have a high likelihood of spreading it to other people. And then some people get it like months later, right? I think they're still learning some things, because initially it was thought, well, if you get it, then you probably don't get it again. But then some people did get it again, but it was like months later. There's just sort of this
Yeah.
I don't know much about it. I mean, quite honestly, I'm kind of ready to just get it done.
Agreed.
You know what I mean? Like, let's just do whatever we got to do to
Yeah.
get life back to somewhat normal.
That was my biggest motivation. The sooner I get the vaccine and say yes to that, the sooner I can get back to more of normal life. So.
Yeah, which you're around people with your counseling practice, so I could see that. I mean, there's different opinions on the vaccine, right? I mean, I don't hold a very strong opinion. I'm happy if it's beneficial. I'm not in a rush to go get it, which apparently I couldn't even get it anyway, right? Like they're giving, you have to qualify right now. So
yeah,
with whatever you do for work or however that works out. But hey, man, happy to hear you got it. Happy to hear it's working well.
Yeah, I'm glad.
And so, did you get COVID at all, or
no?
As far as you know, you hadn't.
And at least in my circle of friends, I don't know a lot of people who got it.
Okay.
But we all, I think, thought it was going to happen. Like
Yeah.
I thought it was inevitable that I would get it at some point in time.
That's
so the
what I
fact
thought
that
too,
so many of
yeah.
us have gotten through it, or
Yep.
gotten through this season,
Yep.
haven't gotten COVID, and now hopefully more and more of us will get vaccinated and we'll move on from this.
Yeah.
I'm really grateful. So.
Agree. By the way, there's water there if you want water.
Oh, sweet. Yeah, I'll probably need that at
Yeah,
some
just
point.
grab one. Well, hey, man, it's Friday afternoon. We made it through another week. Thank you for coming by. I appreciate your time. I was really looking forward to this
Yeah.
one. Yeah, really looking forward to it.
It's been a long week for me, so I'm glad to
really?
be at the end of it.
Okay. Why so?
I've got as we'll probably chat about, a number of different things in my
I
life.
noticed
that I
that
do.
you have a lot of things in your life.
Yeah,
Let's be honest.
Too many jars of honey or pots of honey, or I don't know what the term of phrase is, but particularly I'm in the Anglican churches of North America. I'm an
Okay.
Anglican. I'm in the process of ordination, and they recently released a statement on kind of topics of sexuality and identity. So
Okay.
I'm involved in those conversations and teaching around those topics in those spaces. So I'm very, very busy, responding to all of that.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so
well, if you're
long
in the Anglican tradition being ordained, are you allowed to drink bourbon or no?
Yes.
Do you drink bourbon? Do you want a little bit?
Eventually. Probably
Okay,
shouldn't
let's hit
start
that
there.
later.
I do
all
like
right,
Buffalo Trace, though.
Me too. Yeah, I have friends that know everything about bourbon. Apparently, Buffalo Trace changed some things recently where they're trying to create some scarcity. It's probably a good business move, but I didn't really know about that. But the last couple of times I went in to get some Buffalo Trace, it wasn't there.
Oh.
And then they said they're starting to create some scarcity and make whatever.
Like intentionally barrel less.
Yeah. Like not sell it so frequently through stores and kind of like make it a bigger thing where it's harder to get. Blah blah blah. Supply and demand. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know much about that world. This is literally on the podcast. The only times I ever drink bourbon, really. Anyhow, let's start with though who you are and what you do. Let's come back around to your story so we can jump into that. But you've kind of give people an overview. Like you mentioned, you are into a bunch of different things, a lot of which you've started yourself. So I want to hear about some of those things for sure. But let's just give people an overview.
Yeah. Well, okay. So the thing I spend the most time doing, or at least my day job, is I help start an organization called Equip, which we're a team of missionary consultants who help churches become places where gay people could thrive according to a traditional sexual ethic, according to a belief that God's best for every Christian is commitment to lifelong celibate singleness for the sake of the kingdom, or lifelong marriage between a man and a woman to raise kids together for the church. So that's my day job, partnering with churches and providing training and coaching and teaching so that they can become those places of thriving.
And you started Equip as well, right?
Yeah.
Did you found it yourself or did you have a co-founder?
I did found it myself.
Okay.
But I've got a lot of great coworkers now, which is really good.
I noticed that. But you started this in like 13 or 14, right? Equip. And so this is your day job.
Yeah.
Okay. So, you're also, and I don't mean to cut you off because you're telling
worries.
us, kind of giving us an overview, but your role is as a counselor. Is that through Equip or is that something separate then?
So separate from that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I am a licensed professional counselor, and about a half day a week, I meet with some clients in private practice, separate from the work of Equip, but serving similar people. So, the work in my private counseling practice, I meet mostly with individuals who are gay and Christian, and are trying to find a way to navigate that according to a traditional sexual ethic.
I see.
And then in the work of Equip, a lot of what we're doing is training pastors and parents to better minister to gay people. So coming at the same problem or the same challenges or the same needs, but from different angles, with the counseling versus the consulting work with churches.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
And then Equip, is this donor funded? How do you pay your staff?
Yeah, we're 80% supported by donations from friends and family and people who believe in the work. And then 20% of our funds come from fees for service from churches. And that's been intentional from the beginning, because what we want to do with churches is the long-term, high-touch work. We engage in churches in 5 to 10 year long partnerships to roll out this kind of work in the church. So if the churches we work with had to pay per hour full price, you know, what other organizations that do similar work to Equip, if they had to pay that full price for every hour, they couldn't afford it. And so that's why we fundraise, is so that we can offer our services to churches at a much lower rate. 5
to 10 years is a normal kind of partnership or working relationship with a church. Okay, that surprises me. So this is not like a 3-hour Zoom call or a half a day workshop or an online course. I mean, maybe there's some of that, but generally if a church really wants to enact change and build in and have you guys help them to do it, like this is a long multi-year relationship.
Yeah, so we definitely have some of those early steps that churches can take that are a little simpler and take less time.
Right.
But for the churches that we work with that really want to become that place where gay people can thrive according to God's wisdom, for most of the churches we work with, there's a lot of steps that they need to take and take them slowly, take them carefully. For most churches, they've got 3 or 4 priorities that they're focusing on right now. And this isn't the only thing that's taking their attention.
Right.
And we also want to make sure that we get buy-in from leadership at their churches and from people in their churches that may have different beliefs or different perspectives on this, and move slowly and carefully to educate parents and to educate the average member, and to have the right conversations with teenagers, and make sure we get parents and pastors the training they need to provide good pastoral care and support all of that. So it takes time.
I'm sure, because you're not just spinning up a new program, you're changing the culture of the church probably in a lot of cases, right? Or in some cases?
Yeah, in a lot of cases. I mean, we're convinced that to have conversations about LGBT topics well in our churches, that needs to be a part of a broader conversation about how God has called all Christians to steward their sexualities in God-honoring ways. So we're kind of backing up, or we're zooming out, and we're asking churches, are you doing that conversation well? And most of the churches that we've partnered with say, oh, we need help with that too, right?
Yeah.
We need to do this whole thing better. And before we get to maybe detailed conversations about LGBT topics, let's talk about God's call for everyone to steward their sexualities well. Let's talk about that first. Let's do that well first. So, but even doing that well takes time.
I have to ask now, just because it popped up, is why do you think that this aspect or this subject, stewarding our sexuality, has not been something that the church has been sort of focused on, teaching on, making it priority more? Because just one thing that comes to mind is like, I just feel like financial stewardship is something where the church has been excited about talking about for some time, right? I mean, let's be honest. I mean, this goes back to the 90s, you know what I mean? Maybe even before, even before, but, but I have to think, like, for the last 20 years, there's probably, if you were to like look at the churches, there's probably a lot more discussions on financial stewardship than sexuality stewardship, until maybe the subject has become almost like forced in the last few years, which is probably good that it's becoming forced. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, churches or denominations that have maybe theological beliefs more on one extreme or another, those spaces probably have been talking about this plenty. But my experience and a lot of the churches that we work with are churches that maybe in terms of culturally find themselves kind of more in the middle, while still holding more historical theological beliefs. And in those spaces, there's a lot of incentives not to talk about this because they have people that go to their church that have a mix of beliefs. And those often tend to be maybe more seeker-friendly churches or churches that are kind of doing the simple church model. And talking about controversial topics, it doesn't fit well with the simple church model.
Yeah.
And I think also maybe they remember many of the people who are leading those kind of churches now that maybe want to offer this compassionate orthodoxy or this kind of middle way that holds on to biblical truth but offers it in a winsome way. They grew up in churches that were screaming about the culture wars when it came to divorce or gay marriage or whatever, and they saw that drove people away from Jesus. And they're afraid that there's no way to talk about these topics that won't scare people away from Jesus. And so they just say, why don't we just postpone this conversation? But it can get postponed for a whole generation. I was recently working with the youth pastor at the church I go to, with the teens there, talking about these topics. And what we quickly realized was none of them had heard from their parents or their church in kind of elementary school age or in middle school, had heard them talk about these topics because everyone was assuming someone else was going to do it.
That's right.
And they'd had no education of how does God taught all of us to think carefully about our capacities for relationship and our bodies and the wisest ways to steward those and honor God and enjoy the good things God has made us for.
Yes. Whereas if you're going to talk about financial stewardship, then you're talking about some things where it's kind of hard to disagree with, right? It's like, don't spend more than you make and don't rack up a bunch of credit card debt or consumer debt and, give generously and those types of things. Kind of like, pardon the French, but it's kind of like, well, no shit. You know what I mean? It's like, but no one's going to disagree with that. So maybe that's why the church would maybe be quicker or more readily like talk about some of those things and talk about some of these things over here where there are different views and you're going to get into disagreement and you have to go sort of faithfully investigate what the scripture would have to say and look at scripture's grand narrative and creation's principles and those types of things. Yeah, I can see that. Sure, that makes sense. What would an average case study look like for Equip to get involved with a church? Let's say it's a church that does wind up being a 5-year relationship or whatever.
Yeah.
So they get involved with you. They start to have some discussions. At some point, do you go and give a talk at that church on a Sunday night or Sunday morning or Wednesday night or whatever? Are you involved at that level, or are you working with the leadership and coaching them as they roll out the changes that they want to make?
More so the second. So partnering, coaching, training for the leaders, and then they go talk to the people in their churches. So the first big step that we take with churches is what we call our blueprint process. And it's like a 12-hour mini strategic plan process around this particular area of ministry at their church. And it's particularly for their key leaders, 6 to 10 leaders.
In person at their church?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
well,
like a 2-day?
Pre-COVID, and even during COVID, we've been trying to do some of this virtually and are looking forward to getting back to that.
Yeah, but this would look like 2 half days or 1 12-hour day or...
If they're more local, and we do prefer to work with churches that I could drive, we do them in kind of a session every other week.
I see.
So they've got plenty of time to unpack in between.
I see.
So 2.5 hours every other week.
Okay.
And yes, that deepens their knowledge and their understanding and increases their capacity to disciple, to minister around these topics. But the big goal of that process is they identify what are the needs in our church? How could we be doing this better? What's a vision? Paint that picture of what it looks like. We think it looks like for our church to be doing this better 5 to 10 years from now. And then 3, what are all the steps? What's the strategy to get there? What are the steps we need to take? And then we basically go from there and we help them implement that blueprint, implement that strategy over the next 3 to 5 years. So for a lot of churches, that looks like, how do we make sure that everyone in our church is thinking theologically about sexual stewardship? How do we, make sure our leaders know how to teach that and our parents know how to teach that? How do we eventually get to the place where we have public conversation about these LGBT topics, both so straight people in our churches know how to have these conversations and love the gay people in their life well, and so that gay people in our churches have clarity about what our church believes and whether or not this is the church they want to be at, and whether it's safe to share their story fully. Another kind of big priority for us in churches we work with is making sure that we share about God's love and wisdom for gay people, particularly with kids, with children, teens, before they get to the age where they might realize that they experience same-sex attraction. Because right now there's this, on average, 5-year gap between when a kid first realizes they experience same-sex attraction versus when they first tell a parent or a pastor.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And so that's 5 years that it was, and I was a statistic. It was 5 years for me that I was making sense of these topics all by myself. And that's not a good recipe, right? Because I was left alone with whatever messages from culture and whatever lies of the enemy were around me, right? So instead, how can we, before age 10, age 8, make sure in age-appropriate ways our churches are sharing with every kid about God's love and wisdom for gay people. So as soon as a kid realizes that this is a part of their story, they share with a parent or they share with a pastor. That's a big priority for us.
I love that. And I don't know, man. Some of these things, it's always hard to tell if you have an objective look at where things are at culturally or if it's just your personal experience. You know what I mean? But sure. I kind of feel like what you're saying was missing in the 90s. Maybe it was probably missing in the 80s and the 70s and the 60s and the 50s and the 40s too. But, being born in 84, kind of knowing a little bit more what's going on in the late 80s and 90s, I feel like that was missing.
Yeah.
Do you feel like that also? Do you feel like we're making some, at least with your Equip and the other ministries out there like this? Do you feel like this has always been out there? It's just, or has there been a real drought here and we need more things like Equip?
Things are definitely getting better.
Okay.
But in terms of...
there's more, and by better, there's more ministry, there's more awareness, there's more conversations, those types of things.
I think what's changed is in the 80s, I think most people assumed that if a gay person just went and married someone of the opposite sex, they would become straight. Or if they just prayed hard enough for God to make them straight, they would become straight. So if anyone is still gay, it's because they want to be.
Yes.
And I think in a healthy way, we've come to we've seen the statistics from different kind of research about sexual orientation change efforts. It's just not how it works. I think the best studies, only 3 to 4% of the time does someone who seeks out some kind of sexual orientation change efforts experience any meaningful amount of change. For most people, this is just an enduring part of their life, even if they don't want to be attracted to people of the same sex. So I think accepting that fact, accepting that for most people, it's not God's will that their sexual orientation changes, then we've got a very different question we're asking. The question isn't how do we change or fix or eliminate this problem, but instead, there are Christians who by no choice of their own are going to experience enduring same-sex attractions. How can we be a church where they can faithfully steward those in God-honoring ways and still find healthy family in the body of Christ?
Yes.
And that shift didn't happen until the past decade.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
That's what I perceive too.
Yeah.
But you saying it, it makes sense. Let's come back to all that because, man,
Sure.
there's so much to dig into there.
We opened up a lot of cans of worms.
Yeah, I'm glad we did too, by the way. So, all right, so Equip, and by the way, how many, just for context, what does this organization look like? Do you have a few people on staff?
Yeah, I'm full-time, and then I've got 3 other staff who are part-time.
Okay, and then is there other organizations like you out there?
Yeah, I would say some people may know of a guy named Preston Sprinkle and the organization, the Center for Faith, Sexuality, and Gender. They do some similar but different work. And the organization Lead Them Home or Posture Shift, led by a guy named Bill Hinson. They do some similar but different work. So they're both friends.
They in Nashville?
One, I think is based out of Idaho.
Okay.
And the other based out of Boston. But all of us kind of do work on a national level. So Equip is, we've done work with churches in Montana and in New Jersey and in Georgia and in Tennessee, obviously, and lots of different places in
and
the US.
Organizations you just mentioned, the 2 others, would they have a very similar theological view as you do? Okay.
So, same theological perspective. And then they're just, the tools that they're offering churches are a little different.
Okay, sure.
But from the same convictions.
But from the standpoint of sharing your convictions or theological views, is there like a half a dozen organizations out there, or is there dozens? Because it doesn't sound like there's dozens, right? Unless... In
terms of organizations that are offering training to pastors, to churches on these topics. Less than a dozen, half dozen. Those three, including Equip that I work for, are kind of the ones that I think seem to do the most work. I'm probably forgetting someone, and I'm sorry if I am. And I think that's because there used to be a lot of organizations doing work like this in the 70s and 80s based on the assumption that people's sexual orientation could change if they prayed hard enough. Ooh. And then all that kind of collapsed in the 2000s. And a lot of leaders running those organizations kind of went down with the ship in a really painful and sad way. Mm-hmm. And so, the Lead Them Home organization has been around for even less time than Equip has been. We've been around for 6 years. I think the Center for Faith's been around for like 4 years. Lead Them Home or Posture Shift has been around for 7 or 8 years. So each of these three organizations are fairly young and kind of rose up out of the ashes of the kind of Pray the Gay Away movement imploding.
Wow.
So.
How much damage was done in that Pray the Gay Away movement? I mean, my goodness.
A lot, unfortunately.
Had to be.
Yeah. There was a recent movie called Boy Erased that was kind of about that movement. And some of it is...
Documentary?
It's based on a book that was an autobiography from someone's experience going through one of those programs. So it's a drama. I
feel like I've heard of it. It is a drama movie.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think it captures maybe some of the messages and some of the kind of experiences that people had in that ministry. But there's a great book by Andrew Marin called Us Versus Us. And in that book, he points out a couple of things. And one of the things he points out is that while gay people, on average, were actually a more churched people growing up than the average American. So 86% of LGBT plus people grew up in church, compared to only, I think, 73% on the average American. So gay people actually more likely to have grown up in church, but 54% of LGBT people have lost their faith or left the faith in the past kind of, I think, half century is what he was doing this research over. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that can be attributed to kind of these Pray the Gay Away efforts. Because if the story you tell someone is, there is a God and this God loves you, and for you to prove to this God that you love him, you'll ask for him to take this away. And if he's not taking this away, it must be because you don't want it enough. It must be because you're not doing it right. Mm-hmm. And then if he keeps on not taking it away and keeps on not taking it away, eventually you either come to believe that God doesn't exist or that God hates you.
Yes.
And it's really hard for someone like that to hold on to their faith. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really sad, man. Because it's just another example of how so easy it is to get the gospel wrong. You know what I mean? You don't have to work yourself up into a position where you can appease God. You know, like that is so not the gospel. I mean, my wife is reading the Whole Christ. Have you ever read that? By Sinclair Ferguson? Wonderful book. And she is reread the chapter on legalism. And she grew up Amish. And this is not a knock on the Amish because they're not all legalistic, but there's a lot of rules, so some are, you know what I mean? And it's something you're going to have to work through. And so, there's lots of, truly born again believers in that culture or tradition or whatever, but it has a lot of baggage too when you have that many rules. And she was reading through this chapter on legalism twice and just like, you are saved and then you are righteous. Like you can't become righteous and then get saved. It's so not how it works. You know what I mean? And this is just another example with our sexuality of how we get the gospel wrong. I mean, it's just, it's so rampant and sad, I think, with the church at large and I guess America, that's our context. But, where were we? We were talking about Pray the Gay Away and Equip, and we also need to hear what else you're into. I think that's where we were sort of.
It's a long introduction.
Yeah, let's go back to that. All right, so Equip, and I know you're into some other stuff too. Let's hear about that.
Yeah, so Equip and the counseling is what I get paid to do. Okay. And then there's some other things I don't get paid to do, but that I really enjoy doing. One of them is One of them is helping start a intentional Christian community, a brotherhood for Christian men who feel called to lifetime singleness for the sake of the kingdom. And our kind of community is called the Nashville Family of Brothers. Mm-hmm. And so I've been a part of starting that. Right now there's 5 of us who live in a house together, and we do prayer together every morning, and we do a certain number of meals each week together, and we can do confession once a week, and we do kind of a Saturday night welcoming the Sabbath worship time once a month, and we do vacations together, and we do some holidays together. We alternate Thanksgiving and Christmases with the Nashville Family of Brothers versus biological family. But then we all have normal jobs, 9-to-5 jobs. I mean, right now a lot of us are working from home because of COVID, but we all have jobs outside. We do not get paid by the community that we live in.
Yep.
We are all a part of our local churches, different local churches actually. It's ecumenically Christian. And we're still very much connected to parents and kids in our churches and to other friends outside of our community. So we're not cloistered in any way. So in some ways it's kind of like a monastery. In other ways it's not like a monastery. But yeah, helping develop that is a big part of my life. And what's meaningful for me is, guys make 1-year commitments to this community, and then 3-year commitments to this community, and then eventually make lifetime commitments to this community, which is what I think, to me, the most beautiful part is even in singleness for the Lord, I will know who my people are 10, 20, 30 years from now.
Right.
And that's really important because at least when I read scripture and I see where Jesus and Paul are talking about singleness for the sake of the kingdom, it's not saying loneliness for the sake of the kingdom. And there's lots of indications that what Jesus or Paul intended was for people called to singleness for the Lord to still have a rich experience of family in the body of Christ. So that's what we're trying to make happen with the Nashville Family of Brothers.
Yep. Well, I want to come back to that. Have we covered the main things you're into? Is there anything else you want to call out?
Some writing projects and some kind of, and that's kind of what brought about this CT article related to discernment and vocational singleness. But as you can tell, all of the things I do, I'm involved in, all kind of weave it out of each other. They're all interrelated. Yeah.
Well, I love that about you. You're not afraid to use the gift that's within you. This is something that's near and dear to your heart. You have experienced this. You have some pretty clear theological thoughts around it. You have the ability to express those thoughts. And so you do it. I really commend you for that, man, because I'm sure some days it's be easier not to.
I get tired.
But yeah, I'm sure you do. Yeah. And also, can you, I want to just, the Nashville Band of, not Nashville Band of Brothers.
Family of Brothers, but
Nashville Family of Brothers.
Nashville Band of Brothers is the most frequent, when people are trying to recall the name.
Is it?
If they don't remember the name.
Okay.
The actual
do what
name,
I just did?
That is the one they always go to.
Well, just buy both URLs and you're fine.
If I was talking, if I was talking to some kind of branding expert, they'd probably say, listen, you should just change it to the Nashville Band of Brothers because that's what everyone wants it to be.
I wouldn't be so quick to, because I think family
the word
brothers,
family is important.
It is important. Yeah. And I really, really love that idea because I just feel like it's very, very biblical. And if that is your experience and these are your inclinations, or these are your feelings, this is what you deal with, but these are your theological viewpoints about what Scripture and how creation was designed and so forth, that marriage is for male, female, this is what you need to do, man. Yeah. I mean, living by yourself, dude, no way.
Yeah.
This just seems to make so much sense.
Yeah.
And it feels there's something very New Testament about it. I just feel like. So I just think it's really, I hope it continues to work.
Yeah.
And people have moved in from out of town for this. Is that correct? This is not just, I happen to be in Nashville, so I'm going to go look. This matters so much where someone might move and live in this house with you guys and commit to this community.
Yeah, we had one guy move from Chicago to Nashville to join this community, and another guy move from Dallas to Nashville to join this community. So, I mean, and interesting you bring up, it feels kind of very New Testament. Because these are the the things I'm interested in. I was recently researching, like, what did committed singleness look like in the early church, like the first 200, 300, 400 years of the church. And it was actually fairly common. People who kind of made permanent commitments, both in their heart and sometimes publicly, to be single for the Lord. And what was most common was they were still involved in like the economy of their city. They were still working in one way or another, and they were still involved in their local church. They weren't out in the desert yet or out in caves yet, but they did tend to kind of gather in like groups of 5 to 10 other men or other women and live in a house together. That was the most common way. And there was I can't remember the exact pronunciation of the word, like the rimnuoth, something like that. I can't remember what the Greek word was, but it basically means like kind of city monks. City celibates. And so I like to think that that's what we're doing. We're like city celibates. We're like city monks.
I love that. Well, what I see that it's plausible. Our pastor, T.J. Timms, did his PhD thesis a couple years ago on plausibility structures and the new commandment. And so I hadn't really heard about plausibility structures much before that. So, but the idea is that that all aside, if you are supposed to, or you feel a calling to be celibate the rest of your life and live by yourself and not be in community, that's barely plausible. Let's just be honest. You know what I mean? Like it'd
be difficult.
It's very difficult. It's just not how humans are. I don't know. I feel like it's just not how we're designed, right? We're designed for community and fellowship and sisterhood, brotherhood, whatever. And you get a certain amount of that in marriage and in a family. It's not ultimate, but you get a certain amount of that. But with what you're doing, this to me seems plausible. Like it seems feasible. Like if this is what you believe, I can see this really working and being and bringing fruit in someone's life for the rest of their life. Yeah, I think what you're doing there, I can really see like the foundation for it is scriptural.
Yeah, I mean, and that was that was important for us because we didn't want to just come up with a crazy idea and see if it could work, because these are people's lives we're talking about. And so a lot of the guys who were saying, I have a need for something like this, but why should I take a chance with this version of it? Which I think is a good question. So for us, it was a lot of research of, in the history of the church, how have people done this well? What stuff has worked? What are other brotherhoods doing something similar to this right now? What works about that? What doesn't? So, while this may look or feel like a new idea to a lot of people, we're really just putting a new skin on things that have been done for hundreds of years. Yeah. And
it's also not. It has some similarities with some other groups. There was a guy on here, I think Whit Smith was his name, a guy in town. I think he owns 2 homes. I think that recovering alcoholics live in. They do very much the same. They just live there. Yeah. But they all have their jobs. Yeah. And they've all agreed together they're gonna stop drinking alcohol because it has it's kind of owned their life in the past and they're done with that. Yeah. And I guess it's sort of like Alcoholics Anonymous to another degree. Like you live together. Yeah. And like because you know that if you don't take it this seriously, it could lead to very bad results again. And so you're serious enough about this change and about following, these principles that you're willing to live together and do life together and help each other along the way. I mean, that's very scriptural. Yeah.
And a big reason why we do this, I mean, yes, we all need family. Like I think God made us all for family. There's lots of ways to interpret, like what we see in Genesis 2 when God says it's not good for man to be alone. But I think what God is saying is like, I put you in human bodies. I made you for relationship with other humans. It's not good for you to be without human companionship. Yeah. We still need God, right? Obviously, we still need God. We also need human companionship. And we're destined for a physical new heavens and new earth where we will still enjoy human companionship and perfect communion with God. So it makes a whole lot of sense. But our community isn't just for making sure we have some stable, permanent human companionship. It's have that so that empowers us to use our availability in singleness to do kingdom work. So particularly our availability from not raising kids. So raising kids is this really important kingdom work that Christian parents do. And it takes a lot of time and energy. I only know from looking at it from the outside and being a godparent, I know a little bit of it, right? It takes a lot of time and energy. So when Jesus and Paul talk about this singleness for the sake of the kingdom, what they're particularly talking about is people using all of that time and energy that they would have used to raise kids and then reinvesting all of that time and energy instead into even more kingdom work, into focusing perhaps on projects and justice work and ministry work that parents don't have the margin to do because they're doing other really important kingdom work. So we see our house as in some ways of like an aircraft carrier. It fuels us, it sustains us to then send us out, particularly in our 9-to-5 jobs, to go serve our city and heal in our city and do the kingdom work that God has called us to do with a vigor and with a life that we couldn't do if we were living alone. Or that would be difficult to do if we had a spouse and kids that we needed to attend to and we needed to serve and we need to reserve some of our energy for.
I mean, I have to ask now because I'm curious. I mean, there might be someone listening to this that's kind of already thinking the same thing. But I mean, I just have to ask, man, where did you come from? Like, this is so right.
Sure.
You know what I mean? It's so right, and it's so scriptural, and it's so committed. And I have not talked to many people that are seeing it as clearly as you're seeing it and willing to commit their life to this and change their lifestyle to adjust accordingly and benefit other people that are dealing with the same thing. I mean, this seems really rare, and it seems like it shouldn't be so rare. But
I wish it wasn't. I don't know.
Yeah,
it's probably
it's not going to be as rare in the future based on the work that you're doing.
I hope not. I mean, I think that's some of the goal, and I'm particularly excited about this for the Nashville family of brothers, is that this could become like a little bit of a model for this kind of brotherhood and sisterhood in other cities. We've been praying for a Nashville family of sisters, and actually right now there's a couple of people we've met in Los Angeles who are in the early stages of starting an LA family of brothers.
Cool.
So we'll see where this goes, but yeah, I mean, I think some of what the CT article speaks to is that we need more Christians to consider singleness for the sake of the kingdom. And I think we also need more Christians to settle down into Christian marriage. I think we actually need more of both. But one of the things to make singleness for the sake of the kingdom plausible is we need like this practical way to find family in singleness. And so I hope that becomes a more common part of our churches and our cities, because I think it could make a big difference.
Yeah. Let's be clear on what it is that you believe, because it seems to me that what it is that you believe has people that may disagree from both sides.
Oh yeah.
Okay. State as clear as you can what it is that we're talking about here. Let's just make it super obvious for everyone.
And I probably should have said I've talked about a lot of things. I probably should share it a little bit more. You know, why do I care about a lot of these topics so much? A lot of this is in this intersection of faith and sexuality. So I am a Christian. Hopefully that's obvious from the things I've said already. I'm gay. And I'm convinced that God's best for me is either a lifetime commitment to celibate singleness for the sake of the kingdom, or a lifetime commitment to marriage with a woman for the sake of raising kids. And I'll say for me that wasn't an obvious decision. I mean, while I'm not bisexual, I'm not generally attracted to women. I did date a couple of women in college and was very honest with them early in my dating relationship about my sexuality. And I said, I don't understand this, but like, I kind of think you're cool. Do you want to go on a date? Like, you know, this part of my story, no expectations. Let's just have fun. And I, in those dating relationships, grew a specific desire for those women. It wasn't the exact same as the ways that I was attracted to some men, but it was meaningful enough that like, I knew that if God wanted me to walk out Christian marriage, God wanted that for me, that could work. But for me, a couple years out of college, it seemed obvious. I felt this tug from the Holy Spirit that I was actually supposed to ask God which he wanted me to do. Instead of just going and taking marriage because I wanted it or because it's more convenient in some ways, or taking singleness because I wanted it and it was more convenient in some ways. He wanted me to discern, to go to him and ask him, God, do you have a preference for me? And I felt God call me particularly, to committing to that lifetime singleness for the sake of the kingdom. So I'd say, and for the guys in the Nashville family of brothers, they're of a variety of backgrounds and sexual orientations, and part of considering whether or not this community is for them is discerning, God, are you calling me to Christian marriage with someone of the opposite sex, or are you calling me to this vocational singleness for the sake of the kingdom? So anyways, that's a big part of my story, and it is and it isn't, right? I think regardless of whether or not I developed same-sex attraction, I think God would have called me to vocational singleness. But I will recognize that it was particularly because I'm gay that I ever paused to think about anything other than marriage, right? Like that's the only reason I stopped in college to think, well, I can't marry a man because I don't think that's God's best for me. And I'm not sure if I could marry a woman. I don't want to be single. What does the Bible have to say about singleness? I would never have done that if I wasn't gay. So yeah, that is a big part of this whole journey.
Yep. By the way, do you have, and Lincoln, can you grab my jacket there? It's so cold in this building. It's just concrete block walls, and it's been a cold week in Nashville, man. I'm ready for spring. Yeah. Just grab my jacket if you don't mind real quick, Lincoln. Okay. Real quick question. Do you have guys at the Nashville family of brothers house that are not same-sex attracted, and they just are there because they're choosing to live a single celibate life for whatever reason, for the glory of God, and that's why they're there? Or is it they're all dealing with the same-sex attraction to some degree? Thank you.
Yeah, I can say that among kind of the 20 to 30 guys over the past 3 years who have kind of discerned with us at any meaningful level, we've definitely had a mix of guys who are gay and straight. But I'll say what's been true of all of them is even the ones who are gay and not bisexual, and I think maybe have a similar kind of experience as me, each of them who have discerned with us in a meaningful way, have tried to lean into this question of God, I really want to honestly ask you, do you have Christian marriage with someone of the opposite sex or vocational singleness for me? And even if for some of those guys, if they're gay and if they've never dated someone of the opposite sex, they've never had a sense that could work for them, at least be emotionally and theologically and intellectually open to the possibility of God calling them to that. And that's important because if someone feels forced into celibacy, like in Reddit channels, like a involuntary celibate, an incel is a thing that people talk about, and not in a good way.
Yeah, sure.
But there's lots of people in this world who are not gay and feel like they're involuntarily celibate, and that feeling of being forced into celibacy doesn't lead to someone embracing and living out celibacy well.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Regardless of their sexual orientation. So we think it's really important for these guys, regardless of their sexual orientation, to open-handedly discern both options, so that even if God does call them to celibacy and they suspected that was what God would have for them, they see it as there was a choice, there was an option. God particularly wants this one for me. Okay. I'm going to reach out and I'm going to accept that gift that God is offering and embrace it and own it. Like this is not something I'm being forced into or pushed into or defaulted to. This is what I'm choosing for me.
Yep. Okay, so you believe that sexual intercourse is for marriage?
Yeah, well, so it's tricky when there's one conversation about kind of natural marriage and what is good for humans in general. I think there's another conversation about like what is God's best for Christians in particular. What is Christian marriage that God blesses and sustains in a unique way? And so I think it's a different conversation. We're talking about non-Christians or talking about in a sphere of politics, but we're particularly talking about for Christians, right? For people who like say Jesus is their Lord and Savior, and they're wondering what is best for them. I think the Christian marriage that God blesses and sustains is a lifetime commitment between one man and one woman to enjoy intimacy and to be an image of Christ's relationship with the church and to raise children together.
Procreate and all that. Yeah. Well, okay, you just raised an interesting point. So you're not saying, and I like this too, you're not saying that we should just go out and tell every every person or go, whoever, we don't need to go to college dorms, people that are in college say, hey, stop having sex outside of marriage. This isn't good. That's fine. And it's maybe outside of God's design, but we would start at that point, at that level, you would start with the gospel and you would try to save them first. Right.
Yeah.
And then after that, then we can start to think about, okay, now that you believe in a creator and, Jesus Christ and how that righteousness works, like after you believe the gospel, then let's start to think about how the Bible would have us to live. Then we can start to talk about sex and marriage and those types of things, right? That's sort of what you're saying with like, all right, let's narrow the discussion down to, okay, let's just talk about believers. And if you believe in God, if you believe in the Bible, if you believe in Jesus Christ, this is what you believe then about marriage, if that's your belief system. But you wouldn't just go out and try to make it a thing to talk about, abstinence until marriage with people that, hate God and have no desire to, that's what I'm hearing you say, correct?
Yeah. And I mean, I think scripture even warns us that like people who don't, who Jesus is not their Lord and Savior are going to find a lot of the things in scripture that are like at odds with culture to be silly, right?
Yes.
Or to be crazy.
Yes. Yeah.
So I don't expect to convince anyone who's not a Christian to follow a traditional sexual ethic because, if I intellectually imagine myself living in a universe where there is no God, it would be silly for me to put these restrictions on myself.
Agree.
Of course,
Fully agree. I just think that's such a good point because this came up in a recent podcast with a guy named Annie Schoonover in Austin, Texas, who had run multiple pregnancy care centers. And the one thing that he was bumping into was statistically, if you want to talk about just statistically now, a way to get abortion down in this country is to get birth control out there. But he ran into a lot of opposition from that, from the sort of the conservative Christian camp, because they're saying, no, they need to stop having sex.
Sure.
Well, that's getting that issue above salvation in the gospel. It's like, man, you go out and try to tell people to stop having sex without having a good reason why or believing in the gospel. That's a tough battle you're never going to win that battle.
Right.
And that's what you're saying. So I appreciate that. Okay. So you're saying if you believe in the gospel of Jesus Christ, you would believe that sex is for marriage and marriage is for male and female. Okay. So by believing that, you're going to get a lot of disagreement from, a whole bunch of people. Yeah. But then you're also saying you don't believe it's right to sort of, to use your term, pray the gay away.
Or at least I don't think it's possible.
Yeah, okay.
It would be for some people, it would be convenient if that was an option.
Sure.
But it's just not effective.
Well, and also just to be clear, it'd be convenient for other people, I feel like. Maybe not so much for the people that are that way, but like for the people around them. It'd be a lot easier for them if you could pray the gay away.
It's tricky for me. I mean, it caused a lot of hardship in my life growing up. And certainly when I was in, 8, 9, 10-year-old, when I started to realize that this was part of my life, it would have made my life a whole lot better if I could have just asked God to take it away, and he did.
Oh, I'm sure. I really believe that.
And at the same time, when I look over the past 10 years of my life, most of the most beautiful things in my life have come from wrestling with this way that I'm broken with God and in community with other believers. Like it's hard to imagine me without the contrast of this brokenness. So I don't think God intended for me to be gay. I don't think he ordained for me to develop same-sex attraction. I don't think that's how it works. But God has been really faithful to redeem this in my life for my good and his glory. And it's hard to imagine my story without that goodness in my life and that glory to God.
Yeah. Praise God for that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So it just strikes me as you're sort of, I mean, this is probably what you would believe, and I would agree with it and believe it as well. Like you're taking the way of the gospel. It's this third way, and you're going to get opposition from, not to say the political right and left, but you're going to get opposition from both sides on this, right? Because you're going to get opposition. You probably have gotten opposition from the sort of camp that's the Christian camp that would say, oh, yeah, I fully agree marriage is for men and women, but the gay thing, dude, you got to stop that. You know what I mean? Like,
right. Yeah, or some people who kind of wish I wouldn't use the word gay to describe myself, or wish I would just kind of downplay that part of my story as much as possible. You know, I mean, I don't think I don't present as like a particularly flamboyant gay person. I mean, I don't have a rainbow shirt on, and I don't have like like sweet dyed hair or something.
Yeah.
But just because that's not my style, not because I think there's something inherently problematic with that.
Yep.
But so maybe it's a little easier for me to kind of like pass as like any other person. But still, there's some people who say, why do you always have to bring it in my face? Why do you always have to call yourself gay? Why do you always mention this part of your story? Can't you just chill out? So I get that from some directions.
Okay, so that's speaking to something that I wanted to bring up.
Yeah.
They're sort of saying, you know, if you think about that line of thought, it's sort of like I don't want to put words in their mouth, but it's almost like they think like you're sensationalizing it a little bit, that you're making it a thing where maybe it doesn't need to be a thing, that you're putting it in their face a little bit. And don't you think they're sort of, because this is a question I want to get to, don't you think they sort of feel like, well, man, if you could just stop talking about it, if everyone could just stop talking about it, then it would all just sort of go away. Like there's no way that's ever going to happen.
Sure. Right.
But there's almost like a subconscious in their mind where that's sort of still somewhat what they think. It's like, if we could all just go silent on this, we can kind of starve it out, sort of.
Yeah.
Like, do you think that's a belief out there?
Yeah, it's a mix of things. So I think there are some ways that I find myself sometimes, but I think this is particularly true of some people I know. They intentionally, well, maybe not maybe they're not self-aware about it, but put it on a little bit heavier, sharing this part of their story and expressing this part of their personality as a way of telling that part of themselves that it has value, right? As a way of pushing away shame about this part of their story, as a way of in a healthy way, comforting themselves, as a way of saying, I'm not going to hide or apologize for this part of my story, or kind of pushing on others to create space for them to share this part of their story that makes it safe for others, right? I mean, in some ways, that's what like Gay Pride Month and Gay Pride parades are about. It's about kind of in maybe in an aggressive way saying, we're here and we're going to fight for our people and we're not going away. And if you're in this group, you're loved and you're safe now. And there's some things that I think we should understand, like universally, that are good about that, right? There's plenty of things that I've not personally gone to a Pride event yet. There's lots of things that I'd probably see or experience there that wouldn't be helpful for me, right? So, but there's something good about the people saying to the wounded that in their tribe, you belong here. I'm going to keep you safe. There's some good about that.
Exactly, and it just occurs to me that because I also think there's something about homosexuality, discussing it in common cultural male circles, you know, you pick the age, I guess call it between, you know, mid-teens and to whenever you grow up, which is never for a lot of people or some people, you know, but like to my age, I'm 36, where there's probably some other topics like this, but you know, it's sad that this is true, but I feel like in that age range of just average American Christian, let's even say Christian male, you bring up in an average circle where there's not someone, because most of the time there's not someone in those circles that's present that is gay or openly gay. You bring up the issue of homosexuality. That's the one topic you can bring up where you're going to get some like negative, visceral responses, like some crude things are going to be said, and it's not good. Like it's not. This is not the way that this should be. Like I'm convicted myself of this in the past, and it's not that way with a lot of other things that could get brought up, even sinful things, you know, like you could even take pornography, for example. You bring up pornography in those same circles, you don't tend to get the same sort of visceral, like almost hateful in some terms, like reaction. Like I'm even just thinking like if you're at your average family get together at Thanksgiving or whatnot, and it's a Christian family, and someone brings up, say out a gay pride, the gay pride, parade or something like that gets brought up, and if someone in the family is like has this sort of like, oh, that's like just kind of like evil, that's dirty, or that's disgusting, or that's like kind of really, that'd be a good time to be like, that's we don't need to talk about them like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's almost we there's this subconscious. Anyhow, I'm rambling now, but there's something about this issue that causes a visceral reaction in people. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and you seem to suggest that like maybe that's even a little bit more common among men than women, and I think that might be true. I mean, at least what I experienced growing up was, I think men more so than women feel this need to prove that they're not gay, or to clarify if someone like sees two dudes who are in close friendship and makes a joke about them, or if a guy dresses in ways that are a little different than their friends and someone makes a comment about that. Women don't police each other around that kind of stuff as much as men do, and we can ask the question of why that is. But it seems like in male friend groups, there's more suspicion of, hey, are you gay? Or what are you doing? What is that? Is that gay?
Yep.
And then there's more of a need to very, like, in a strong way, prove that you're not.
Yeah.
Right? And one way you can prove that you're not is being cruel toward whatever gay is. Right?
Yeah.
And so I think and that becomes a cycle that feeds itself over and over again, and maybe that's part of this larger conversation about like masculinity and what is healthy masculinity? What is healthy biblical masculinity? And sometimes is that a little extra? Do we feel a need? Are there too many pressures for all of us to prove some extra muscular version of American masculinity in the church that hurts us in a lot of ways, not just in maybe more homophobia in some male Christian circles, but maybe some other things as well.
Yeah.
So that's a whole lot bigger conversation.
So you're right that part of that is there's just this need to prove to themselves, maybe in others, or clarify that they're not gay. Okay, but I think a lot of times too, it's more sinister than that. Like, don't you think too, there's this misunderstanding of the gay couple or the gay person that they're talking about. There's almost like they perceive a particular sort of, it depends on the circles that we're talking about here, but I think with some, they perceive a particular sort of sin or evil that almost like a possession of some sort, like a dirtiness there that they feel like they're choosing to sort of entertain and involve themselves in, and it's a particular sort of nasty, as opposed to say like a more air quotes innocent sin like theft or murder or infidelity or something, and there's a particular sort of dirtiness around, and that needs to stop, because that's not accurate. You know what I mean? That's not biblical.
And I think that's the other reason why maybe some people are uncomfortable if I use the word gay to describe myself, or if I wear a t-shirt with a rainbow flag on it is, and I'll admit, when I was growing up and I heard people use the word gay or homosexual, I could tell from context clues they meant that word to mean a particular thing. And what they meant that word to mean was gay people are these people who have group sex parties, and they all do drugs, and they're all drinking, and all of them hate God. Right? That was when someone used the word gay, it meant all of those things. So it makes sense to me that if I'm speaking at a church and there is a meaningful number of people in that church, that's all they've known that word gay to mean. And then I use that word to describe myself, and then I say all the other things that we've said here already. It's very confusing to them. They're like, what the word gay means, not just that you are attracted to people of the same sex, but all this other stuff that I've been told it means.
Right.
Wait, but now but then you're saying these other things that contradict it. So that's confusing. So I think that's one of the reasons why maybe people wish that I would not use that word and downplay this part of my story, is it's easy for them to conflate same-sex attraction with all of the other things, stories accurate or not, that they associate with gay people.
Yes. Okay, that's accurate. And I'll submit something for your consideration. possibly the reason this is causing such a visceral response in people is because it's not just about same-sex attraction, okay? It's about all of like the things you mentioned, the drugs and sex parties and all this type of thing. But even part of that too is like a turning your back on sort of the Western way of society and doing life, which is heterosexual, family-oriented, that type of a thing. Yeah. And I wanted to get around to this with families too, so we'll come back around to this. Yeah. But there is a certain... Sometimes it's hard to tell whether the idea comes from the church or whether it comes from society. And I think in some of this, sure. and then I think sometimes actually ideas come from society, creep into the church, and then the church owns it and thinks that it came from the church all along, when actually the idea came from society. Yeah. And I think family is one of those things we need to touch on. But sure. But if and when that happens, when an idea comes from Western quote unquote Christian American society or culture and comes into the church, and the church owns it, when you poke at that thing, you will get a visceral response unlike any other. I mean, I think we saw this in the last year with some of the political stuff going on. It's like when on that sort of Christian right camp, I mean, just to make it pretty practical, there's plenty of people in that camp that can't fathom how you could be a Christian and vote for Biden. Let's just call it what it is. Yeah. Like they can't fathom it. It's like it's impossible. Like there's just, and it creates sort of this energy, this response, this good versus evil, this right versus wrong, this outrage when you poke that side. And I think whatever that is, I think the gay thing with those people, it's poking at that thing. Sure. It's almost like it's almost like it's truer to them or internalized more to them than even the gospel. It's like, well, we understand that some people believe the gospel and some people don't, but you poke at that one part where it's like now you're poking at sort of the Western American like ideal, the way of doing life that is so precious to us and we can't have that changed. You will get you will get a crazy response, which we saw on January the 6th when all these crazies stormed the Capitol. I'm talking about this all kind of slumped together here. I mean, it's whatever that is, you will get a really, really strong response. Yeah.
If you go back to that, that transition we talked about earlier in our conversation from the 80s to now, from assuming if a gay person wants to be straight enough, God will make them straight, to now an acceptance that for a vast majority of people, that doesn't seem to be God's will to change their sexual orientation. So go back to the 80s. For a person who believed, for the average straight Christian who had the assumption that, well, if a gay person wanted to be straight enough, God would just make them straight. Well, then it confirms that, well, then all the people out there who are gay just want to disobey and reject God.
Exactly.
Right? And so it was that, I think in many ways, it was this inaccurate, in many ways, scientific assumption or kind of that people, if they just prayed hard enough or if they just went to the right therapy, they could become straight.
Yes.
That's what made it easy to believe this, to have this certain kind of ish towards gay people.
Yes.
So
I have to...
Because they have no one to blame but themselves. I'm doing air quotes here. Yeah. They have no one to blame but themselves because they could be normal if they wanted to.
Yes.
But they're choosing not to be normal.
I mean, I think there was a point in my life where I believed that, man. Sure. Like I have to confess that. And I was young and stupid and didn't know a thing. Sure. I didn't have any gay friends that I know of that were openly gay. But I even feel like at one point I believed that. You know, like you could change if you want. It's just so why aren't you changing? You know what I mean? I want to touch on the family thing because I think that's important too. Yeah, it's one of the things that I love so much about what you're doing with the Nashville Family of Brothers is, and you touched on this in the Christianity Today article. It's just that is a biblical choosing to live a celibate life for God's glory and to do His work. I mean, my goodness, it's called out explicitly in the New Testament. I mean, there's things that are called out way more implicitly that people like really like build their lives around even more than this. But this is clearly it's a biblical category, okay? But it's a very unpopular one. And there are, just so you know if you don't already, there are people that the nuclear family is God, man.
Sure.
You probably already know that, but there are people that's like, you don't mess with their family. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Husband, wife, and their kids. Like, that's what it's all about. The church can't mess with that. Society can't mess with that. Heck, sometimes they even bring their kids home and school them at home because they don't want, and there's most homeschoolers, probably that's not the case, because there are lots of great homeschoolers out there. But there's people that take that nuclear family so seriously and make that the center of their life.
Yeah.
And that's wrong, because it is possible to make the family the center of your life and not God.
Sure.
And anytime God is not at the center of your life, it's super wrong. And that belief system doesn't leave a lot of room for the single. Like, they might be like, yeah, sort of, maybe, like they would, I think a lot of them the Christian ones would be like, yeah, they understand that the singleness is. But I also feel like they think it's, some people like that take the nuclear family that seriously would think it's like the single life is still somehow subpar.
Sure.
And that also needs to go away, because I think that was also something left over from the 90s.
Yeah.
Because we're not talking about like option A, and if that doesn't work out, then we go to option B.
Right.
We're talking about following God, option A, option A. It's just two different ways of following God, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think two things there. First, to the person kind of in the nuclear family where their particular focus is just our nuclear family, build walls around this, keep everything in. I understand what some of the pressures are for why people feel the need to do that. But I also know a lot of people who have done that and they found themselves lonely, right? And that's not because that husband or that wife, there's anything wrong with their spouse is any more broken than the average human, right? It's because we're all made for relationship with more than just one person and God, right? And so I think I'd encourage that. I think even those nuclear families who are kind of isolated would discover that their marriage will be healthier when they have healthy friendships with other people in the body of Christ. So that's my little push on them. But I also want to recognize that one of their fears, and I think the fear of some people who hear me talk about singleness is, oh, you're talking about more singleness and less marriage. You're pushing, Peter. We're afraid that you're pushing more guys in their 20s avoiding getting married, just using hookup apps, and then playing video games. And less people getting married. That's what they are afraid of that I am encouraging. And that's not what I'm encouraging.
Right.
I'm actually encouraging more Christian marriage and more singleness for the sake of the kingdom. And I think the problem is for a lot of those people, they only kind of think of two categories. They think of single and Christian, or single and married, excuse me.
Yeah.
And I want to tease that out actually into three categories. Married, committed to singleness for the Lord, and then the singleness we're all born into. Because I think that helps tease this out more.
Yes, that is.
I would agree. We have too many people who are still stuck in the singleness that we're born into.
Agreed.
And
yeah, that's a good point.
I was waiting for some audience participation.
It was registering, but when it landed pretty hard. You're totally right about that.
Yeah, so we have too many people, and I'll call this like temporary singleness. Okay, we have too many people kind of, and I think some like social commentary people call this like prolonged adolescence, right? We have too many people in temporary singleness that's lasted longer than it's supposed to, and haven't either settled down into singleness for the Lord or settled down into Christian marriage. What I'm encouraging, and particularly in this Christianity Today article, is for every Christian young adult to discern with God, to ask God, do you want me to settle down into singleness for the Lord, really use all my extra time and energy to do more kingdom work, not to play more video games and find more people on hookup apps, right? Or God, do you want me to settle down into Christian marriage and serve the kingdom in that way? And so it tends to be when I make this clarification and I say, hey, I don't want less marriage. I actually want more marriage than we've got in our churches. And I want more people settling down into singleness for the sake of the kingdom. And I don't think these things compete. I actually think if there's more marriage and more commitment to singleness for the sake of the kingdom in our churches, it will make both healthier. It will be good for the church and good for both parties.
That's just so well said, man. I've I couldn't agree more. And I mean, I won't keep poking at the nuclear family as ultimate more. It's just, it needs to be poked at because for whatever reason, that is more acceptable in mainstream evangelical Christian communities than it is to live a celibate lifestyle and be single.
Sure.
And it's like, we have to admit at some point here, we have to face the fact that it's really easy to elevate your family and what your goals for your family to ultimate levels. And that needs to stop. Like that's sin too, you know? I mean, it's, you have a particular stewardship and responsibility as parents. And so you have that, and that's from God, and that's well and good, and it's why there's parents, and that's God's creative design and everything. But there is something about parenting that can be really easy to make it ultimate, and you are just, you will do anything to protect your family and keep others away and keep sin out. When the Bible's saying the worst sin is in our hearts, like you can't keep it out of your household. It's in your kids' hearts already. Trust me. Like, so anyhow, all right. We touched on the family thing. I want to make sure we touched on that. Where should we go from here? We should hear probably about your story at some point too, right? Yeah.
We can. Yeah.
Let's do it.
Sure.
Yeah. Let's hear about, I want to hear about your story.
Yeah.
Where you grew up and all that. How you knew you were gay and what age and those types of things.
So grew up in East Tennessee, in Kingsport, Tennessee, in the Tri-Cities. And grew up in like a pretty typical Christian home. I've got a little brother, mom and dad. And,
Anglican?
We did grow up going to an Episcopal church.
Okay.
And then I've kind of been everywhere in between then. We went to an Episcopal church, and then when a lot of people left the Episcopal church, we went to a Catholic church for 2 years, and then we landed at a Methodist church, and I went to a Southern Baptist and Reformed summer camp, and then in college I went to a PCA church, and then I went to a kind of more progressive Church of Christ church while attending a campus ministry in college that was also Reformed Baptist. So I've done a little bit of everything.
Yeah, you have.
But I've returned to Anglicanism more broadly over the past 6 years, and have been pleasantly surprised by what was familiar and what I kind of appreciated more now because I've been in other spaces for so many years in between.
How did you handle the internal knowledge that you were gay? When did you start to sense that, and how did all that play out? Yeah, so
I grew up in a culture and in a church where, I don't know if a church, but in a family and in a city where, like, I knew at least the short line, God's against homosexuality. Right, like that. I knew that that's what I was supposed to believe, or that's what the Bible supposedly said. And so, in sixth grade, when I realized that I was attracted to other guys, at first I tried to ignore it, and then I tried to make deals with God. Right? Okay, God, what if I get like straight A's for the next 6 months? Will you take this away? What if I obey what my parents like what they ask me to do, like without question, no protest, will you take this away? If I don't play video games for 6 months, will you take this away? Right? I tried to make these deals with God because I knew my life would be easier if this wasn't something I had to manage, make sense of. And anyway, over and over again, I held up my part of the bargain, and God didn't hold up his part of the bargain.
How old were you
he never agreed to the bargain, so
to be fair,
really blame him. To be
how
fair,
old were you at this point?
Sixth grade. I'm always bad with correlating ages.
So sixth grade, so 12-ish, 11 to 12 probably?
That sounds about right, yeah.
Is that kind of the beginning of when you started to notice this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so about 12.
Yeah.
And it's just, where you would maybe look at another boy the way that another 12-year-old might look at another 12-year-old girl? Like, is that sort of like those feelings? Is that sort of how you could tell?
One of the ways that I've heard other people describe it that fits for me is if they'd hear other guys describing what they find attractive in girls, I wouldn't notice that, or that wouldn't register for me. But then over time I would notice, but I am noticing those things in other guys. I am lingering and kind of curious in ways about other guys that my guy friends seem to be about other girls.
I see. Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
And how do you think about that? Like, God created mankind. He created us male and female. Like, those are the two options, male and female. And the creative design was for male to be attracted to female and female to be attracted to male.
I think so, yeah.
And yet there's all kinds of sin out there and ways that we've messed it up, and would you say like one of those, like hundreds, right, or thousands of, but one of those ways or outcomes of sin is that some people become or are just always were, as far as they know, like just attracted to the same sex? Like, is that, how do you think through that? How do you rationalize it? Right.
Yeah. So I talk about it as a brokenness. I think that's a helpful way for me to talk about it. And yeah, so I don't think God, when God first imagined me and imagined me being born into a perfect world, I don't think he imagined me experiencing same-sex attraction. But I did develop same-sex attraction, and God didn't stop that from happening. And that happened probably through some mix of genetic predisposition and some kind of environmental factors in my family and whatever. I don't think I had any part in choosing that or making that happen. I don't think there's any of blame of that on me. And often people ask me, well, if this isn't what God intended, and yet he didn't stop it from happening, and he doesn't answer your prayers to remove it, that doesn't sound like a good God. Like, how could that be how this works? And at least for me, from like my theological background, we're asking really a question about free will, free process, consequences of our decisions, and God's goodness and providence. And how does that all work out, right? And my only explanation is, whether it's genetic predisposition or the stuff that I experienced in my home growing up, whatever it was that contributed to, and we could see genetic predisposition even as a form of like generational sin. Some people see that as like a manifestation of generational sin. So my understanding is I developed same-sex attraction because of the sins and the brokenness of other people that impacted me at a genetic level, at an emotional level, right? Could God have swooped in and protected me from those consequences of other people's decisions? Yes. But if our choices don't have consequences, do we really have choice? Right? And so one of the ways that God believes that it's more good to allow us choice and to allow the consequences of our wrong choices to play out in ways that cause us pain, but then us have the capacity to choose to love him, than to take choice away from us but keep us safe. It's a greater good, right? So that's how I understand why did God not protect me from developing same-sex attraction? Why has God not taken this away? Well, because God believes that the greater good is for me to truly have choice and others to truly have choice. And more often than not, what that means is for God to allow the consequences of our decisions to play out, even in ways that hurt us.
Yeah.
And hurt others.
Yeah. And even the choice thing, and I agree with what you're saying. And then also too, I mean, you said it earlier, you don't think you would have the same Pieter Valk today if you didn't deal with this, right?
Yeah, it's hard to imagine.
It's hard to imagine. Yeah. I mean, there's things that happened in my life that were extremely difficult, and it's hard to imagine the same Kent Lapp sitting here without those things having happened. Yeah. And so, and would I trade the outcome and the depth and character like that you have developed for dealing with those things? I mean, and then you got to say, well, then some people would say, well, sure, but like God could have still made you the same person you are without having dealt with that. But the problem with that is now you're putting yourself in the place of God, because, in God's providence, you did deal with what you dealt with, or you did go through the pain you went through, whatever that happens to be, the difficulty in life, because we all have it. And like he is working in all things, that's somehow working for the good in you, and it's developing a uniquely godly, strong you with a certain depth of character that you wouldn't have if you went through those things. And if you want to say, well, sure, there's a way that God could give you those things without having gone through that. Well, of course, but now you're putting yourself in God's seat now.
Right. Yeah. There's only one reality. There's only one universe that we know of. So it's only kind of a mental exercise to try to imagine other things, but it doesn't do us much good.
Yeah.
This is the story I have. This is the world we live in. And for me, what's been more helpful has been focusing not on, I've made peace with the question of God, why did you not stop this? Why did you not change this? Right. For me, I'm encouraging myself to focus on, how is God redeeming this for my good and his glory? How is God using this for good? How can I lean into that? Well, what is my part to play? How does God want to collaborate with me to make good of broken circumstances?
For also to, like, if you're, and there's something about people's sexuality where if you're asking even a Christian, like there's a lot of people that would believe in God that if you would say, and yes, if you are same-sex attracted, then that's fine. You don't need to try to change yourself, but you also per God's design wouldn't get married and have
get married to someone of the same sex.
You wouldn't get married to the same sex and have a sexual relationship then. There's something about our sexuality that we hold pretty high and have a tendency to be unwilling to hear that. Right?
Yeah, I mean, but because it feels like, it's
our right.
We have a right to that. We just need romance and sex. How could you? That's just cruel, right? And I think the problem there is the assumption that we need romance or sex to be whole people.
But we do, don't we?
I don't think so.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, at least we see examples of Jesus and Paul and many of the early church mothers and fathers. Many of them were celibate. And I don't think that was because they had like a heroic, Jesus had a heroically different faith than I did, obviously, but I don't, I think the differences between Paul and early church mothers and fathers and me and other celibate people today, I think the differences in our faithfulness is maybe marginal. I don't know. I don't really know. But I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, these are normal people. So I don't think, and I would push against maybe like a psychological theorist who would say that we have a need for sex and romance. We have a need, for spiritual intimacy, for healthy physical intimacy, for emotional intimacy, for intellectual intimacy. And each of those, if you think of them as like buckets that need to be filled each day, some of those can be filled with romance and sex. But none of those 4 buckets require romance or sex. And there is a healthy emotional intimacy and physical intimacy and spiritual intimacy and intellectual intimacy I can enjoy in meaningful friendship. And we actually have a model for that in Scripture. We see the deep friendship of David and Jonathan, the deep friendship of Jesus and John, the deep friendship of Ruth and Naomi, the deep friendship of Paul and Timothy. Those weren't romantic or sexual relationships, but they were deep, satisfying spiritual friendships. And so, other thing I want to say is, I think the reason why we think we need those is so many of the stories we grew up hearing and we see on Disney Channel tell us that we need romance to be whole, right?
Yes, I wanted to touch on that.
I think the idol. And you earlier were kind of pointing out maybe some of the ways that we idolize the nuclear family in the church, or maybe idolize marriage. I think there's some truth to that. What I think maybe is a more accurate place to focus the spotlight is romance, the idol of romance. I think in many ways that's the problem. And I think it hurts married people too.
Yeah.
Right? Because part of this lie of the idol of romance is, if you just found the person that was the one, the right one, this would be easy. Oh, is this not easy? It must be because they're not the one. Is it not magical? It must be because they're not the one. Or maybe the problem is maybe the real problem is that what we see in Disney Channel and movie theaters about romance is a lie.
Yes.
That real love isn't that magically easy. It's built and sustained. It's not magic.
Yes, that is such a key point. And so if we find ourselves, always talking about from a young age with your daughters, like 3-4 years old, like just becoming infatuated with who they're going to marry and what characteristics you want in your future spouse. Like, dude, that was a big thing back in the 90s when I was a kid. It's like, write down what you want in your spouse and, have all this thing figured out and like put thought into it and pre-planning into it. I mean, some of it's fine and some of it's just like, stop it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Just
some 11-year-old girls already have their like wedding Pinterest boards done.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's
and
a
if
lot.
that's the case, and not every time that happens, you would say, well, that's definitely idolatry, because that's the thing with actions. Like you can't tell the motivations, rarely can you really tell someone's motivations. However, it would be reason for pause.
Sure.
You know what I mean? It's reason for pause. If that is happening, or the parents are constantly talking about who their kids are going to marry, like those are just ways that you subtly reinforce this idolatry of romance. Mm-hmm. I'm glad you touched on that, man.
There's a great book by a guy named Cutter Calloway who's works at a seminary, I think Fuller Seminary out in California, called Breaking the Marriage Idol. And I'm friends with Cutter, and he's actually said himself that he didn't want to name the book that way because it makes it sound like it's attacking marriage, and that's not actually what the content of the book is. Like he would probably, if he could rename the book, he would call it Breaking the Romance Idol. And it's a great book, and the whole first half is really talking about in secular culture, what are the stories about romance, and that we need romance, need sex to be whole people, and what are some ways that Christianity in America has not resisted that and has enculturated that ourselves in some different kind of movements, purity movements, and some different messaging around who real men and women are. So so there's a really interesting conversation in there about Disney and about Taylor Swift and about The Bachelor and The Bachelorette, and then about True Love Waits and I Kiss Dating Goodbye, and maybe kind of a John and Stacey Eldridge version of what real men and women are.
Yeah.
He has a conversation about all of that is really interesting and really teases out how romance has become an idol in America and in the church.
Yeah, dude, it really has, man. And I mean, look, and people like someone might be listening and thinking, well, dude, Kent's no fan of marriage. No, dude, I would be lost without my wife. I'll just be honest. You know what I mean? All evidence would indicate I was not one of those guys that was supposed to live a celibate lifestyle.
Sure.
Meeting Mariana and having that marriage and that relationship is like, it's probably the biggest joy of my life. You know what I mean? Like, it would be pointless without a creator God and a redeemer in Jesus Christ, obviously. Huge fan. I'm just not a fan of, being infatuated by it and that being the way that your life needs to go, and thinking a ton about it from a young age and pre-planning. And man, I feel like you're just setting yourself up for heartache, if at the very least.
Yeah.
The idolatry aspect aside, you're just setting yourself up for heartache.
Yeah.
I mean, so
yeah, someone asked me the other day if like 90% of Christians are supposed to get married, and maybe like 5 or 10% are supposed to do this singleness for the sake of the kingdom, right? Okay, the odds of getting married are pretty good, so why not just everyone assume we're going to get married? The 90% odds, like I'd go gamble with those odds.
Yep.
But I think the problem with assuming that marriage is going to be what God has for us, right? And talking to our kids with that assumption is, for the 90% who do get married or who are meant for marriage, they take it for granted, right?
We
don't see it as a gift that God has given. We don't see it as a mission that God has given us.
Yep.
We don't own it. We don't really take full responsibility for it.
Yep.
And then for the 10% who assumed marriage was for them and it's not what God has for them, they feel cheated.
Sure.
So I think everyone has to benefit from teaching our kids and teens and young adults not to assume marriage, but instead kind of with open hands going to God and saying, I want to learn how both of these options could be good for me. And could you tell me which one will be better for me? And then I'll step into that one, not because I'm unthinkingly taking it, but because I'm convinced that that's what God's best is, particularly for me.
Yes.
And I'm going to be thankful for that gift.
Yes. What I love about that so much too is it puts Christ at the center, or it puts, another way to think about it is it puts God above all else. Like, it puts the common denominator there is you're following God, whether that's going to be through marriage or whether that's going to be through singleness. And if we're not careful, if you don't think about it that way, you're starting to position romance and marriage sort of as a god in that society. So I also wanted to ask you, you had mentioned you had dated some girls at some point, and it sounded like, kind of like if you really had to, even as a believer, you could have married one of them and sort of like made that work-ish. Is that accurate?
Yeah. So a term that might be helpful here is a mixed orientation marriage is the term that are kind of used in these conversations to describe an opposite sex marriage where one of the individuals experiences same-sex attraction.
Okay.
And those are not like super common, but they exist in every church, and probably in your church. There's some of those in my church. And some of those couples share that part of their story, and some of them don't. So yeah, that mixed orientation marriage would have been a possibility for me in those dating relationships with those girls, in the physical intimacy that we did share. Like, I knew that marriage could work for us. In the ways that I felt towards those women, I knew that like I actually, for one of them, I actually did come to love her in a way that was really robust. So it was never going to be exactly the same as maybe some of my straight guy friends and their marriages, but I'm not going to say it's challenging in different ways, right? So one of the things that was true in my dating relationships with these women is like a lustful desire for them and to enjoy physical intimacy with them. And if we're talking in a lustful way, really use them as an object for my pleasure wasn't really present.
Okay.
And that was a really good thing. Right? She knew that she knew that like rarely ever were my motivations because I was like trying to get her to have sex with me.
She knew that.
Yeah.
So you were open with her.
Yeah, well, yeah, I was open with, but I mean in a positive way. She knew that I was not some like horn dog trying to take advantage of her, right? And she knew that I didn't have mixed motives. She knew that like if I was doing her a favor, or I was saying sweet things, or I was taking her on a date, she knew that this is because he actually likes me, and because he wants to communicate affection to me, and because he values me not just for what he could get from and with my body, but other things as well, right?
Yep.
So I think the challenges of a mixed orientation marriage are probably obvious to people, but I think there's also some unique blessings. From the very beginning, like puppy love is not what fueled it. It was an intentional investment. Like I think this is someone I could go on mission with for God, and we're going to build this kind of sober love together. There's something really neat about that. And so the mixed orientation marriages, I know that they shared about this part of their story early in their dating relationship, that they continue to talk about this honestly in their marriage, that they share this part of their story, their couple's story, with at least some other couples, and are kind of really honest about this and seeking the help and the support they need, are some of the most beautiful marriages I know, because early in their dating relationship, they had to have this honesty, this communication, and the foundation of the relationship is a little bit something different. Again, still recognizing the challenges, the ways it's different. That's not for everyone, but I do think, hey, what we're talking about here is me like challenging every straight person to really discern with God, am I called to Christian marriage or singleness for the sake of the kingdom? In the same way, I want to challenge every gay Christian committed to a traditional sexual ethic to, at some level, discern with God, am I called to Christian marriage with someone of the opposite sex or singleness for the sake of the kingdom? Yeah. It's only fair. I'm going to ask that of everybody.
Yep. If you had gotten married and had a mixed orientation marriage, is that the term you had for it? That's a new term. I hadn't heard of that, because I wanted just as you were talking, I wanted to bring it up because I was going to say, I mean, I have to think there's some people that got married and then realized maybe later, or maybe they knew it when they got married, but for whatever reason, they still got married and had same-sex attraction, right? That has to be out there, and you just said that it is.
Yeah.
And so like in those cases, like if, I guess, let's not say those cases, but in your case, like what if that had turned out like, would that have relationship just been marked with a lot less sex, you think? Or not necessarily? Or like, is it more of a partnership? Or is it still, it can still be a fully functioning, loving marriage? It's just that particular marriage deals with a particular thing like every marriage does, but maybe not that particular thing.
Yeah, I mean, from the healthy physical intimacy that we enjoyed in our dating relationship, I had every reason to believe that we would enjoy like full marital intimacy. Now, in the first couple of years, would we have had sex as frequently as maybe some of my like straight friends and their typical marriages did? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know, right? But my hunch is by like year 5 or 10 in the marriages probably would have looked pretty similar in terms of frequency of that. Yeah, we can get into a trickier conversation about, I think if every one of my straight guy friends who are married, before considering having sex with their wife, ask themselves, am I stepping forward with this because I want to communicate my love for my wife to her, or because I want to use her as a tool for my pleasure? I wonder how less frequently they would have sex.
Yeah.
So I don't know what it would have been exactly for me and how that would have compared to other marriages, but more sex isn't always better.
Yeah, I mean, it's talking about such a strong and mysterious motivator.
Sure. And usually it's a mix. To be clear, I don't think ever it's like 100% one, 0% the other.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Those motivations I just listed.
It just strikes me now as like what we're talking. I mean, goodness, we're talking about like same-sex attraction and marriage and love. Like
we're talking about everything.
Sexuality is such a strong and mysterious motivator. You know, it's like, man, yeah, there's an element of mystery to it that's probably always just going to be there, you know, but for whatever reason, this is how God designed us. Anything else you want to touch on in your story? Well, how'd your parents take it?
Yeah, I think when I first shared with them, which was like sophomore year of high school, they didn't really know how to help me any more than I knew how to help myself.
Oh, that's what you shared with the sophomore year of high school. You mentioned the 5-year thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
But they told me they loved me.
Okay.
And they told me they would help me however they could.
Oh, that's good.
And yeah, now my parents are like big supporters of the work I do.
Oh, really?
My dad helps run Equip's email account.
Oh, really?
Just like general information email account.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Do they share your general theological viewpoints then?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Man, that's what a blessing that is.
They're really supportive. I think some other big highlights are, in college, I really started sharing this part of my story with the Christian community that I was in more, and started doing life with other guys who were gay and Christian and committed to a traditional sexual ethic. And I realized that all of us, were afraid that following the Bible's teachings would mean we would be alone. And none of us had parents or pastors who knew how to care for us well. And so in many ways, like that was the beginnings of all of like the work I've been doing in the last decade of my life. Equip is an attempt to provide parents and pastors with the understanding and skills that they need to better love gay people like me. And the Nashville Family of Brothers is an attempt to offer family to gay and straight people who feel called to singleness for the sake of the kingdom. So a lot of that, identifying that need and starting to think about what are the best solutions to this problem, we're in college. And yeah, so a lot of this is a long time in the making, or at least a decade in the making.
Yeah. That's what I love so much about the work that you're doing, is because it gives me hope that in one of these churches that you're involved with, or in any sort of random church, as you start to enact change, that, you know, that 12-year-old boy realizes that he is gay, and he doesn't seem like it's going to change anytime soon, and he grows up in a church that does then understand and knows better how to deal with him, and doesn't try to make, you know, and shows him the love of Christ, and just reacts in a more positive, beneficial, encouraging, uplifting, gospel-oriented way, and less of the shame and turning your back and that you must change to stay in this family or the church, like less of that and more of the good stuff. Like, you know, it's going to happen. I mean, it's not going to happen overnight, but this is a good start.
Yeah.
You know, missions like what you're doing, organizations like what you're doing, more of them. It's going to have an impact.
Yeah.
So I love it. On Equip's website, it's equipyourcommunity.org. That's your organization. You had, I think, a blog post about September 20th, 2018, saying I'm gay. You were just saying, as we planned for Equip's 2018 event, Why Come Out? You were reminded that you'd never come out. So you wrote this blog post, which was really good, by the way. So if someone Googles I'm gay and equipyourcommunity.org, they'd probably find your blog post. But there was one paragraph in here I am most ashamed of these moments where my fear of being outed and disgust of my homosexuality turned to homophobia that hurt others. I'm haunted by a scene from high school cross country. Derek was the only openly gay guy in our school, and he was on the team. As we waited for the starting line for a race to begin, everyone paired up for partner stretching. But one by one, as Derek asked the other guys to help him stretch, he was turned away with, "No, gross. I don't want to touch you, and I don't want you touching me." Then he got to me, and I sheepishly refused. I dished out the same pain I had spent tears and prayers to soothe. That has to cut like a knife. Like, how does that, to be that person, to be Derek, and not have, you know, anyone be willing to help you stretch. Man, what does that feel like, and what kind of damage does that do?
It's sucky.
I'm sure. It's awful.
Yeah.
How does someone like deal with that? I mean, of all the things to deal with in life, like, to be Derek and deal with that, like, do you just try to ignore it? Do you try to forget about it? I mean, that's hard.
Yeah. I mean, I can imagine if his story is any similar to mine, you hope for a while that it'll just go away. And then eventually you try to find places where you can be you and will be loved. And I guess that's why I'm hoping some of our churches could become a place where I could still, where 8-year-olds, where 12-year-olds could share this part of their story, and they know they could still be loved, where they're not scared to share this part of their story. And they could still find God's love and God's wisdom for them. Because when someone doesn't have anywhere to go, that's why we see the higher rates of depression and suicidality, particularly among gay teenagers. LGBT teens are 5 times more likely to attempt suicide. Kids who grow up in highly rejecting families gay teens who grow up in highly rejecting families are 8 times more likely to attempt suicide than the average gay teen, right? So even the response of family to when they first share matters a lot. And there's, I can't remember the exact number, but something like gay teens who grow up in families where religion is important are like 30% more likely to attempt suicide. So unfortunately, depression and suicide feels like a better option than continuing to walk into that high school every day and feel unwelcome and be told, ooh, gross. I don't want you touching me and I don't want to touch you. Go away. And that's really sad. It sucks.
Have you experienced rejection like that?
At times. Usually it would be more from strangers, and if I'm around some other guys who maybe present a little bit more flamboyantly than I do. But
where they might like reject the group.
Yeah, or kind of just like yell a slur or something from a distance. So,
oh man.
But I mean, I'm thankful that. I mean, my story wasn't Derek's story in some ways because I didn't come out. If I'd come out and if I'd shared my story fully in high school, I would have been met by the same things he had. When I started sharing my story for the first time in college and the Christian communities that I was in, I was loved really well. But I also know that like when I shared with my parents, when I shared with that Christian community, it was with the clear caveat, and don't worry, I still believe in a traditional sexual ethic and I'm not going to go pursue a relationship with a guy. I don't know how those spaces would have reacted if I would have shared something different.
Sure.
I don't know if I would have received the same love. And
Do you experience rejection today, like with some of the probably not the churches that you're talking to because they're coming to you probably for the most part, but does society reject you today occasionally?
Yeah, I just by the nature of like the work I do and the people I live around and the people in my church, I tend to be around people who who love me well. I'm thankful for that. I know there are still plenty of spaces in America and plenty of churches in America where that wouldn't be the case, but I'm really blessed to have spaces where I feel safe. But there are times when kind of maybe Equip is working with churches that are a more different than the church I go to. Where I hear things that are painful to hear. I hear the ways that they talk about gay people. And you know, it's again, in contrast to maybe some of the like the physical harm that gay people experienced in the 70s, in the 80s, in the 90s, what I'm about to share after this seems like a small thing, right? And I think that's a credit to how America has changed in some positive ways. But even like we talked earlier about this disagreement about what word I use, right? Whether I call myself a gay Christian or call myself a Christian who experiences same-sex attraction. It's just words, right? It's not a big deal. But recently the denomination I'm in released a document, a statement that at least at kind of national level events and communication forbids me from calling myself gay or calling myself a gay Christian and only allows me to call myself a Christian who experiences same-sex attraction. Admittedly, it's a small thing, right? They're not putting a rope around my foot and like dragging me behind a pickup truck, right? Like this is small potatoes compared to what gay people had to put up with in the 80s, you know, in the 70s. But it does hurt because it's just another hoop I have to jump through to prove that I'm a good enough Christian for them. And that does hurt.
Sure.
And again, it's a small thing. I'm not trying to like wah. I'm a victim. I have the hardest life over here. You know, but it is a small thing. And you know, for me, okay, fine. I can follow their requests. I think what's harder is for a teenager that goes to my church, who is in a church that teaches a traditional sexual ethic, hopefully in compassionate ways. Maybe they're in a family that teaches that in a more culturally conservative way. Maybe there's a little bit of homophobia among their peers, and they already are having to deal with this. All of these messages that we need romance, we need sex, and they're faced with this dilemma. Well, God has not changed this part of my story. Does God even love me? To honor God and make him happy, will I have to give up these things that the world says is most good for me? Okay, there's plenty of burdens. And just being a normal teenager in America, also other challenges. Okay, layer onto that we're now going to police what words he can use to describe himself. It's the fact that
I see that.
It's the straw on top of a big stack of heavy plates. And at some point it just becomes too much. And so that's why it's a small thing. But that's the kind of stuff that I experience that kind of rubs me the wrong way.
Sure. No, I'm glad you shared that. How can the average person listening to this, the average married person, the average family member of well, let's say the average mom or dad listening to this, who, they're straight, married, they have their family. How can they help?
Yeah.
Like this Nashville family of brothers. I mean, I sort of like, by the way, are you willing to share like what part of town it is?
We live in like the Fisk TSU area, North Nashville.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. Cool.
Yeah.
Super intriguing to me. Like, I'm just thinking, do you guys need a meal at some point? Or, you know what I mean? Like, how can the average person listening to this help?
Okay. Well, I think if parents were to do anything, I think the first is, would be to make sure that they've had these conversations with their kids. If you go to, there's some free resources on Equip's website. If you go to equipyourcommunity.org/blog, and you scroll down and you find, there's a series of blogs called Parent Conversation Starters.
Oh, cool.
And we've got 8 free guides for parents to start conversation, lead conversation with their kids about a lot of these different topics. One of them in particular, how do we share about the reality that there are gay people in the world and make sure our kids know that God loves gay people and he has wisdom for gay people. If any parents listening, make sure they've had that conversation with their kids. And 6, 7, 8 is not too early to have these conversations in careful ways. And in those parent conversation guides, it has age-appropriate ways to lead those conversations. So it says, how could, because we've got 2, 3, 4, 5-year-olds who are noticing in YouTube videos that they're watching and noticing when they're out on the streets, gay people and rainbow flags, and are asking questions. So, you've got opportunities to have these conversations in careful ways and lead your kids to think in theologically accurate ways about sexual stewardship. So that'd be my first encouragement. Parents, do that. But then more kind of focused on this conversation about discernment, vocational singleness, the Nashville family of brothers. I'd encourage parents in the language they use with their kids not to presume marriage, not when you get married, but if. And to offer early both of these possibilities of Christian marriage or singleness for the Lord. Recognizing that one's more common than the other, but kind of setting up this expectation of, hey, both are good, they are different. Let's explore what Scripture has to say about both of those. Let's make sure there are people in our family's life in both of those stories. Let's make sure there are some celibate people, there's some single people. Excuse me, I had to burp. Let's make sure there's some single people leveraging their singleness for the sake of the kingdom who are in our kids' lives so they can see that could be good too. And let's set up this expectation that, hey, once you get into your later teen years and your young adult years, you'll get to ask God that question. You'll get to ask God, hey, God, do you have a preference for me? Which might be better for me? Right. And we're going to be excited for you to ask God that question.
Yep.
Those kind of conversations set up that expectation with our kids. I think that's another great thing that parents can do.
Okay. Parenting aside, is it good for couples to invite their celibate single friends over to their house as much as possible? Holidays in particular. Is there other ways that we can have a more congruent, healthy society, particularly at kind of the church community level?
Yeah, I think so. So one of the ways that we talk about this at Equip is kind of our inner circle of the body of Christ. And for the people who are married, it's probably obvious that their spouse and their kids are in that inner circle of the body of Christ. And what I want to encourage kind of nuclear families to do is to add a couple of unrelated single people to that inner circle in the body of Christ. And so I'm also talking about consistency here, right? Consistently invite the same people walking out singleness for the Lord to meals with you and to do some holidays with you and different things so that they feel like they're part of like this extended family with you.
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're awful at that, but I can see the reasoning.
Sure. Well, and during COVID, it's a little harder, but yeah, eventually we're going to get back to normal life and encourage people to do that.
Well, we're not awful at it because of COVID. We're awful at it because it's just not on the radar. So I'm definitely...
One of the ways I've seen, I'm in a tradition where they do godparents, they do infant baptism and godparents. I think particularly choose celibate people to be your kids' godparents.
Yeah,
that's a way of
that.
kind of knitting
Yes.
single people into your family's life and into your kids' life.
Yes. Yeah, I love that. What else do you want to talk about, Peter?
I don't know.
I think we covered a fair bit. I just want to make sure. We have to touch on this briefly before I let you go. Can you briefly describe, and I don't know if this was your kind of categories, but like side A, B, and X. Can you touch on that just a little bit, please?
Yeah,
where that
sure.
came from, because I found that helpful too.
Yeah, so a lot of times when we talk about sexual ethics, theological beliefs, with LGBT topics, people use the word, biblical or not biblical, liberal or conservative, progressive or traditional, affirming or non-affirming, orthodox or unorthodox, right? So what's in common with all these, right? They're pairs of words. They're like oppositional, and they're usually loaded words, right? Like even with the word we use, we're kind of signaling what the right choice is.
Yeah, but we love that, man. It's
Right.
what the society is built on. We
Fair
need
enough.
a good and a bad and a right and a wrong.
Fair
and,
enough.
Oh, we love controversy in the United States of America.
Yes, we do. Gay people get caught in the crossfire. They get the
I believe
friendly
that.
fire.
Yeah.
So I want to offer or some people before me have offered a different way to kind of frame or kind of describe different theological camps, and also recognize that there's more than just two ways to think about this. So, an organization called the Gay Christian Network, that's now renamed themselves as the Queer Christian Fellowship, which is not an organization that I'm like particularly involved in, but they did popularize this side A, side B, side X language. So first we've got like three options, and side A, side B, side X, they like, at least at like face value, they're kind of value neutral. Like it's not clear which is better than the other. I mean, maybe side A is like option A or something. Maybe it seems better, but for less loaded than liberal conservative,
Right.
or affirming, non-affirming. Okay. So this describes three theological camps in this conversation. So side A is what you would think of as a progressive sexual ethic, or a gay affirming theology. It's a belief that God would bless an opposite sex marriage in the same ways that he blesses. Side A is a belief that God would bless a same-sex marriage in the same ways that he blesses opposite sex marriages, right? And that God made people gay, intended for them to be gay, and it's no less broken than heterosexuality. Okay. Side X, we'll say because they are kind of on a line, a spectrum, A and then B and then X. So side X, we'll go to the other end of the line, is a belief that if and it's named after the ex-gay movement, or pray the gay away. Side X is a belief that if people pray hard enough, God will make them straight. That continuing same-sex attractions are a sign of lukewarm sanctification, or kind of a lack of kind of sexual lack of stewardship and kind of trying hard enough. And that everyone is supposed to be married to someone of the opposite sex. And that everything about gay culture and gay people and gayness is bad. Okay, that's side X. And then in the middle, there's a middle cluster of belief called side B. And this is where I would find myself. Kind of this is what describes what I believe. And people who are in this space believe that same-sex attraction is a result of the fall. It's a brokenness. It's not what God intended. And God's best for all Christians is Christian marriage with someone of the opposite sex to raise kids, or celibate singleness for the sake of the kingdom. But there's no formula for changing people's sexual orientations. It happens very, very infrequently. So, and what God's best for us is still God's best for us. And we do, even if we don't choose who we're attracted to and there's no formula for changing it, we're still responsible for what we do, for the actions we take, how we respond to our attractions.
Yeah.
And so even for gay people, the best things for them is either Christian marriage with someone of the opposite sex, or celibate singleness for the sake of the kingdom.
Yeah.
And in this kind of side B theological space, there's also some recognition that, hey, maybe there's some benefit to, in some careful, limited ways, Christians who are gay recognizing that they're gay. using that word to describe themselves, finding some healthy connectedness to gay culture. You know, maybe it's okay that when they see a gay character in a TV show doing harmless things, that makes them feel good because there's someone like me in this story. Maybe it's okay that they could listen to an artist that they know is gay, and enjoy the fact that, oh, this person's like me. So that's side A and side B and side X.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I found it was very helpful. You described that very well. I mean, I feel like, you're already my brother in Christ, but now I feel like you're my brother, like in life. Like I've met you and I've enjoyed meeting you, and I want to be friends going forward.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
Yeah, that'd be great. And I feel like I need to walk in the light a little bit with you, because this is kind of a thing with where I go to Emmanuel, Nashville. Have you ever visited?
Yeah.
Walking in the light and being honest with each other, like that's a key ingredient to the Christian life. Yeah. And I have to say, and like speech is a big thing for me. Like I just can't stand when people talk negatively about other people behind their back. You know what I mean? It's not fair. Yeah. And like the whole gossip scene and passive aggressive stuff and how you talk about people, like it really matters. People deserve honor and respect. And I don't care who you are or what you've done. There's a certain amount of honor and respect that you're owed just from being a human being. You know what I mean? But a few weeks ago, we were hanging out with neighbors. It was just the four of us. And I don't know how we got on the topic or why we didn't stay there very long, but the general premise of the very short discussion was I was just commenting how I sort of understand like women with women, but I don't understand like guys with guys. Sure. And it's just like, it strikes me now as like, that was completely unnecessary thing to say, you know? And like the other guy sort of agreed, and then we just moved on. And it's like that like, this is what I've enjoyed about this, is now that I've met you and we've had this discussion, I would never be able to say that again with a clean conscience, because it's like, dude, it doesn't matter if you get it or not. It's some people's experience. Don't talk like that. You know what I mean? So I wish I hadn't said it. I'm confessing that I did. And I'm glad that I've met you now, because I'll be honest, Peter, like, I don't haven't had a conversation like this with another openly gay guy, I don't think ever. And so there's probably a lot of other people out there like this too. And part of my hope with the podcast is that if people listen to this and they can hear your heart and your desire for Christ and your faithfulness to the Bible, that sort of the same effect might be had on them too. It's like once you sort of have that encounter with someone, or you have a friend with someone in a particular thing, it doesn't really matter what it is, but in this case, like same-sex attraction, it changes how you, like, it's hard to have this sort of more this us versus them mentality or whatever it is going forward. Like it changes how you think about, you know, the people that deal with that. So I just want to say that. Thank you for your time. So I think it's past 5 on Friday night.
Well, I've enjoyed it.
So I should probably let you go. But genuinely, really appreciate your time. This has been great getting to know you, and I'd love to stay in touch going forward. Anything you want to say in closing before we wrap this up?
I mean, sure. One last thing I'll say is, well, I'll just say, I think for some people it's really hard to believe that like singleness for the kingdom, that celibacy is a good thing. It's hard for them to recommend that to their kids or recommend that to a gay person they love, because it seems like it's really second best. And you spoke to this a little earlier. So one way that some people might kind of have a reminder of the goodness of celibacy and how good it could be is, I really think this is not just a shameless plug for social media, but it is in a way, is the social media account for the Nashville Family of Brothers, particularly like our Instagram or our Facebook account. Like, follow us and come along the ride with us. See the beautiful things that are happening in our house and our family. And I hope that gives you hope that celibacy actually is good for some people. And it'll be, and by reading those stories and by kind of coming along this journey with us, it's easier for people to recommend like the singleness of Jesus and Paul to people they love. So that'd be kind of a final thing to say is, follow us on Instagram or Facebook.
Yep.
And I think you'll find the stories to be really encouraging.
Yep. Love it. Pieter Valk, thanks for being on the podcast,
Thank
man.
you.
Appreciate it very much.
Yeah.